Welcome to Betrayal Stories. In today's video, I'm sharing a story I never imagined I would speak aloud. Not because it was dramatic or shocking or scandalous, but because it was quiet. Because it unfolded in the spaces between grief and silence. Where emotions don't announce themselves, and where the heart can wander without permission, there are things we swear we'll take to the grave. Not because they are sins, but because they are complicated. Fragile. Because once spoken, they can't be undone. This is one of those stories. After the funeral ended and the last car pulled away, the house became something else entirely. Not empty, no. Emptiness would have been easier. It was full of echoes, full of reminders, full of a presence that no longer had a body. My husband had filled that house for years, with habits so familiar I'd stopped noticing them. The way he cleared his throat before speaking. The way he always left one cabinet door slightly open. The rhythm of his footsteps in the hallway at night. When he was gone, those things didn't disappear. They lingered like unfinished sentences. Silence is often described as peaceful. That silence wasn't. It pressed down on me, thick and relentless, like a weight on the chest. Every room felt too large. Every night stretched longer than it should. His son arrived the day before the service. I hadn't seen him in years, not really. He wasn't a child anymore, not even close. But in my mind, he was still the distant teenager who used to nod politely and retreat to his room. We had never been close. We had never been cruel either. Just separate. Bound by circumstance, not affection. I was never his mother. I never tried to be, and he never asked me to. The funeral passed in a blur of condolences and practiced sympathy. Hands squeezing mine. Voices telling me how strong I was. How proud my husband would be. I smiled when I was expected to. Thanked people when it was appropriate. Inside, I felt hollow. That night, after the house finally settled, I realized Ion hadn't gone to the guest room. I found him in the living room instead. He sat wrapped in a blanket, shoulders slightly hunched, staring at the fireplace as if it might suddenly come alive. It wasn't lit. It didn't need to be. His grief didn't require warmth. I stopped in the doorway, uncertain, unsure whether to speak or to quietly disappear and leave him to his thoughts. Grief creates invisible rules. You're never sure what you're allowed to do, so I chose the safest option. I went to the kitchen and made tea. I assumed he'd be asleep by the time I returned, or that he'd excuse himself. He didn't. When I brought the cups back, he looked up at me, and something in his expression caught me off guard. It wasn't just sadness. It was anger, sharp and unresolved. Questions without answers. The kind of pain that has nowhere to go. I handed him a cup and sat down at the far end of the couch. We didn't talk. The silence between us wasn't comforting, but it wasn't awkward either. It was shared. Heavy but mutual. At some point, our arms brushed. It was nothing. An accident. A simple contact, and yet it lingered. I told myself it didn't mean anything. That grief makes people hypersensitive. That the body seeks warmth when the world feels cold. Still, when I went to bed later, I couldn't sleep. The days that followed blended together. Meals eaten without appetite. Paperwork spread across the dining table. Closets opened and closed, items sorted into piles that made no sense. Ion stayed. He said he wanted to help. To organize things, to make sure nothing important was overlooked. I didn't argue. The truth was, his presence made the house feel less unbearable. He moved through the rooms with a quiet confidence, careful not to intrude, but not hesitant either. He belonged there in a way I hadn't expected, like someone familiar. Yet newly revealed and slowly, almost unwillingly, I began to notice things. The way his face resembled his father's, but sharper now. More defined. The sound of his voice deeper than I remembered, steady in a way that grounded me. The way he carried himself, no longer unsure, no longer defensive. Some mornings, I'd wake early and find him in the kitchen, already up, already moving. Making coffee. Leaning against the counter like the space was his by right. Told myself not to watch. I failed. It wasn't desire not at first. It was awareness. The realization that time had passed and people had changed. And grief had rearranged boundaries I thought were permanent. One evening, I found him in the garage going through his father's tools. Dust clung to his hands. The light was low, casting shadows that emphasized the lines of his arms. He turned and smiled when he saw me. It wasn't flirtatious. It wasn't guarded. It was open. He never let me touch these, he said. Said I'd hurt myself. Stepped closer, drawn by the memory in his voice. He used to say the same thing to me. Ion laughed quietly. Maybe he was right. The sound lingered long after I left the room. That night, the house felt different. The hallway between our rooms seemed shorter, charged, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I tried to distract myself, cleaned surfaces that were already spotless, turned on the television without absorbing a single word, picked up a book and read the same paragraph over and over. Loneliness isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a steady ache, a reminder of how long it's been since someone reached for you without thinking. I heard movement from his room, a door opening, footsteps. I stood in the hallway before I realized what I was doing. My hand hovered near his door. Logic told me to turn back, to return to my room and close the door on whatever this feeling was, before I could decide. The door opened. Ion stood there, surprise flickering across his face. Can't sleep? He asked softly. I shook my head. You. He stepped aside. You can come in, if you want. I should have said no. I should have smiled politely and retreated, preserving the distance that had always existed between us. I didn't. The door closed behind me with a quiet finality. We stood there, neither of us moving. The room was dim, the air thick with something unspoken. He was close enough that I could feel his warmth. I don't know what's happening, I whispered. Me neither, he replied. Our hands brushed again, this time not accidental. We sat on the edge of the bed. The silence between us charged, fragile. He watched me carefully, as if waiting for me to change my mind. I shouldn't be here, I said, yet I didn't move. His hand closed around mine, not forceful, not demanding, steady. Needing comfort doesn't make you wrong, he said quietly. What followed wasn't planned. There were no declarations, no sudden decisions, just closeness. Careful, measured, as if we were both afraid of breaking something that couldn't be repaired. Time slowed, the world narrowed to small details, the sound of breathing, the feel of another person beside me, the weight of a moment that existed only because we allowed it to. When we finally lay back, side by side, my emotions overwhelmed me. Not guilt, not yet. Something closer to disbelief. To awakening. Afterward, we didn't rush apart. Our hands found each other without discussion. I'm okay, I said when he asked. He nodded. I haven't felt this steady in a long time. We talked quietly until morning. About his childhood. About my marriage. About how grief rearranges priorities and blurs lines you thought were permanent. When sunlight filled the room, I watched him sleep and felt something shift inside, not relief, not certainty, but possibility. The house no longer felt empty. For the first time since the funeral, silence didn't hurt. It breathed. Grief doesn't come alone. It brings strange needs, unexpected connections, and moments where comfort feels like survival. And sometimes, in the middle of loss, something unexpected arrives, not to replace what was lost, but to remind us that we are still here, still breathing, still human.